Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Primal Edge Health Show here. I am honored and pleased to bring to you one of my favorite personalities in the low carb world, a fantastic researcher, a psychiatrist who has worked at prestigious universities such as Harvard. Georgia Eid, MD, is here to talk to us all about mental health, the mental health crisis, animal foods, keto, carnivore, and whatever else is on her mind. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Eid.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's great to be on.
All right, all right. So we got a bunch of people in the chat watching right now. A lot of people very, very excited to hear from you.
Hi,
Um,
everyone.
let's let's start out by getting a little bit of background. How did you get interested in using diet as a therapeutic approach in practice as well as in your own life? How did this become important to you?
Well, I think like a lot of doctors who have joined the sort of alternative nutrition circles that are growing is through my own health problems that I couldn't solve using the information that I was taught in medical school and the information that I had absorbed culturally my entire life. It just wasn't working, and because of so many patients that I wasn't able to help using standard advice. And so when my own health started to sort of fall apart in my early 40s, I started doing some diet experiments to try to figure out if I could feel better because every doctor I saw said everything was fine. Even though I was having, migraines and fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue and IBS, and I was, missing time from work and feeling really pretty bad, but there wasn't anything quote unquote wrong with me. I took matters into my own hands and just started, getting curious about my diet, keeping a food and symptom journal, which I did for about 6 months. And, at that time, before I started these changes, I was eating what everybody told me I was supposed to eat. I was eating a lot of whole grains and, soy milk and non-fat yogurt and giant salads and all kinds of fiber, skinless, boneless chicken breast kind of thing.
Yeah.
And, it was very high fiber, high plant, low cholesterol, low meat, low fat diet. And that was the diet that I happened to be eating for many years when my health started to deteriorate. So by trial and error, and this was before I knew anything about, this was in 2007, and I really
Yeah.
wasn't aware of paleo or anything else. And so I just ended up through trial and error with a very high meat, very low plant diet. And that seemed to take care of everything. And when I noticed that, I was thrilled that I felt so much better because I really hadn't expected to feel, I expected, well, maybe my stomach pain would improve. I didn't think that anything else would really get better. I thought, man, I'm just getting old. And so when everything got better, everything, including things I hadn't expected, like mental health,
Yeah.
mild depression and anxiety gone, excellent concentration, good energy, everything was so much better. I thought, well, this is strange. This
Yeah.
is not what's supposed to happen. And, as a psychiatrist, I got really curious about why this diet, which is upside down from what we're told to eat, why would this diet be better for my mental health? And could I use this information to help my patients? So that's when I started studying nutrition for the first time. I've never studied nutrition before.
Hmm.
And as you know, and many of your listeners, I'm sure know, all you have to do is scratch the surface of any, spend 3 days looking at nutrition science, and you'll find absolutely no support for the conventional wisdom and the general guidelines that most of us are told we're supposed to follow.
Right. Yeah, no, and what a shattering of the reality that brings to a lot of people. We get told the heart healthy grains are going to save our life, that we got to load up on fiber and cereal with some soy milk in the morning with is going to give you all those heart healthy grains and the high carbohydrate approach. We realize that maybe that's not the right way to go about it. Maybe not the best for everybody. Shoot, maybe not good for anybody. Um, and so you were practicing as a practicing psychiatrist at the time, right?
Yes, I'd been practicing for quite a few years at that point
Yeah.
already.
Yeah. So, and you, psychiatry is not really looking at diet as a way of treating patients, right? It's not really on the plate.
Well, it's starting to slowly change, but certainly at that time it wasn't anything. I mean, in 4 years of medical school, we got maybe two hours of nutrition
Yeah.
lectures, maybe three in 4 years. And during 4 years of psychiatry residency training, we didn't speak about nutrition at all. And so it certainly wasn't on my radar in terms of something that could be used to help people with mental health. I really never thought about it until my own experience got me to question whether that would be something that could be helpful to people. And had been working for years as a conventionally trained psychiatrist, prescribing
Yeah.
medications, offering psychotherapy, and a lot of my patients weren't getting better. So it was great to be able to learn about something new that I could offer people that might help.
Wow. So you kind of felt like you were coming up against a wall, it sounds like, within the kind of standard dogma within the practice, the standard of care, I guess you call it. It seemed like sometimes that wasn't enough. Sometimes it just didn't work.
It often didn't work, and even when it did work, quote unquote work, so even when medications work, there are side effects. There are, you pay a price for the relief that you get. The relief is often not 100%.
Yeah.
So, get a little bit better or moderately better. Most people don't feel that they're completely recovered using medication.
Hmm.
And not only do you pay a price for the medication you pay copays if you're lucky enough to have insurance, but you also pay a price of the stigma of taking a medication. And you may pay with sexual side effects or weight gain or a blunting of your emotions. Lots of different types of side effects that people can struggle with. And and depending on who you're seeing as your psychiatrist, it's quite common then to
Yeah.
add another medication to treat the side effects of the first medication. And so it's
Right.
not uncommon to see people on two, three, four, or five medications after a while.
So it sounds like psychiatry very, very similar to, other branches of medicine, where it's kind of like the kind of, sometimes I call it the drug and shrug approach, right? You give some drugs and see if it works. If it works, it works. You had a drug deficiency apparently, and it's yeah, it seems things like statins, right? Statins, people are getting prescribed statins for high cholesterol. It lowers their cholesterol, but then their testosterone tanks. They get depressed. They get more anxious. They lose bone mineral density. So I mean, psychiatric drugs are not immune to these bad side effects. It seems, huh?
Not at all. You're exactly right. And it's funny when I looked back on it and realized how much of my training had been focused on learning medications, learning medication side effects, learning about medication interactions,
Hmm.
learning about when to prescribe them, when not to prescribe them, which combinations, and it was a huge part of my medical training. And we didn't have enough training in healthy bodies. Why are things set up the way they are? Why does the body work the way it does? What helps to keep a body healthy? How does healing work? How does inflammation work? We weren't taught much of anything about
Hmm.
normal healthy body processes.
Well, and you kind of transitioned really well there into some of these other topics that I've got a whole list of things I'd love to ask you about, because obviously the mental health
Sure.
crisis it's no joke, right? I mean, you're dealing with university
Uh,
students as well, and I kind of see the university system as as uh, kind of the nexus of the mental health crisis that we see these days. And when I was in the university, um, it wasn't as bad as it is now, but I've heard some alarming stats on the amount of university students that are now taking medications for psychiatric illnesses, whereas in high school they didn't have access to this. They get in the dorm rooms, they get a little depressed. The diet's crap. I mean, you're eating processed junk food in the dorms, and also the social situation, the social environment is very, very strange, especially dorm living, and then they go to the psychiatrist on campus, and it seems like drugs are the first option that are used to treat them. So, what have you? What do you think is going on here with this mental health crisis? Do you think how much of this do you think really is inflammation in the body due to dietary issues, right? Like very, very high intake of seed oils, very high intake of sugar, grains, lectins, anti-nutrients. How much do you think this is actually affecting our mental health, and what kind of pathways um, would it be affecting?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I worked on college campuses for 13 years, 7 years at Harvard, or 7.5 or something like that, 5. Anyway, total of 13 years at Harvard and then Smith College. And, so I really have an up close and personal uh, view of what goes on college campuses. And, I think it's hard for me to know exactly how much of what people are suffering with has to do with diet and inflammation and oxidation and all of the other different problems that you can get when you're not eating a healthy diet. But if I had to guess, I would say the vast majority. And I only say that because mental health seems to be mirroring physical health in terms of, we know a lot more. We have many more years of research behind us, looking at the connection between diet and physical health. And so it's very, very clear that most of our modern chronic physical health problems are related to diet, and people are coalescing around that understanding now. With mental health, we're further behind in terms of the research, but it's all panning out the same way. It's all following the same. It's all following the same patterns,
Mm.
and the same underlying processes are occurring in the brain as in the rest of the body. The brain is connected to the rest of the body, it's part of the rest of the body.
Whoa.
And so it makes sense that if you're eating in a way that's damaging your body from the inside out, it's of course also damaging your brain from the inside out. And like you said, college food culture is really atrocious. And it's not just that, students for the most part have to eat in dining halls, they can't cook for themselves,
Right.
but they have access to junk all day long in vending machines and in
Yeah.
the cafeterias.
Not to mention
They're dessert like foods
recreational drugs and
every
alcohol too, right? I mean, they're drinking a lot. I mean, this is affecting the gut.
Well, that's true. And then even the culture of administration on college campuses encourages eating refined carbohydrates. They'll lure, even wellness directors and deans and presidents will lure students to wellness events with cupcakes and pizza and brownies and ice cream. And because they don't know how damaging those foods are to the
Yeah.
brain.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy, and I'm thinking of your history at Harvard, right? I mean, as I'm sure you've looked very deeply into kind of the history of the modern dietary guidelines, and it's so funny to me how intimately interconnected and intertwined Harvard as an institution is with the modern, not only medical system but also agricultural system. I mean, Harvard was instrumental in getting the whole GMO revolution, the gene revolution. They were also very instrumental in the green revolution as well. And yeah, how did you feel about that? When you worked at Harvard, I know you were doing some dietary intervention as well. Did you ever feel like maybe I'm working at a place that doesn't really have the same interests as far as big picture dietary and agricultural policies go?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, Harvard is a very big place, and with lots of different silos. And so I was in the University Health Service,
Hmm.
which was basically an island within a sea of many islands. And so the Harvard School of Public Health, where Professor Walter Willett, was
Hmm.
in charge for a very long time, and Dr. Frank Sachs, who advised the American Heart Association about low fat for many years.
Hmm.
The Harvard School of Public Health is all the way across the other side of town and has nothing to do with the University Health Service. So it felt like, even though I was at Harvard, I wasn't part of that nutritional culture. I could, in the beginning, do what I wanted in terms of recommending what I thought was best for students, and
Yeah.
with no pushback whatsoever, until leadership changed 6 years into my position there. And the new director said, this is beyond the scope of psychiatric practice. We don't want you to be doing this anymore. And,
Yeah.
and I don't think that came from the Harvard School of Public Health. I think that was, I don't know why it was, but I think that there's a lot of resistance to, uh, I mean, basically, who am I as a psychiatrist to give nutrition advice, right? I think that
Yeah.
was the thinking.
Right. Well,
I was hired to prescribe medication.
dietitians. What are they want? Dietitians who were, the American Dietetics Association. There are a lot of funky ties there, right? To Coca-Cola being playing a major part in a lot of the curriculum at the American Dietetics Association historically. That's kind of funny, right? It's nobody can give dietary advice except the kind of the priesthood of basically big agriculture. Um, Interesting. And what
Yeah, I
about?
mean, no doctors have training in nutrition, and so does that mean that no doctor should be giving advice about nutrition? I think that it's an open question. Who has the authority? Who should be giving the advice? And I think you would agree with this, is that we need to be our own experts. All of us need to be our own experts on nutrition, because
Mhm.
you can't trust the governmental guidelines for sure.
Yeah.
And you have to learn this stuff for yourself, and it's actually not that difficult. It's pretty simple.
It really is. And when you get down to it, there are certain essentials in the human diet, which it's a great segue into animal foods. So why are animal foods so important for mental health, for gut health, for the brain? And you wrote a great article about, do we need animal foods? And yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. What the heck is so special about these animal foods, and why should we consider making them a major part of our diet? Or definitely at least make sure to include some animal foods in the diet.
Yeah, animal foods are the only foods, contrary to popular belief, that contain every nutrient we need in its proper form, and without any anti-nutrients. And so, plants, all of them, all plant foods, are missing certain essential nutrients. They all contain anti-nutrients, which work against our ability to use anti-nutrients and/or toxins that work against our good health and nutrition. And so if you base your diet entirely on plant foods, you're going to need to supplement extremely carefully. And you're going to have to be aware that plant foods eating a diet too high in plant foods is very hard on the body. Plant foods are difficult to digest, and they contain these natural toxins in order to protect themselves, to which some of us are more susceptible than others. So, animal foods they're easy to digest. They're nutritionally complete. They don't contain any natural toxins, because animals don't need to defend themselves with chemical weapons. They can defend themselves with claws and fangs and growling and chasing.
Hmm.
And so they're really the safest, most nutritious foods you can eat. They're really the only superfood that there
Hmm.
is.
Yeah, it's such a loaded word, right? Superfood. Kale gets thrown around as one of these superfoods. And when you look at kale next to something like liver, it's kind of incomparable, right? And then also, you mentioned anti-nutrients. What type of effect? What are some of these anti-nutrients that you would be concerned with, right? A lot of people throw around the word anti-nutrients. A lot of people throw around the word plant toxins. What do you think are the most convincing arguments for for possibly minimizing plant toxins, and which plant toxins slash anti nutrients should we look deeper into?
Yeah. So when I think about plant foods, the way I try to explain this to people is to try to imagine that you are a plant, and if you're a plant, you're trying to protect yourself in the world, and you're trying to reproduce just like every other living creature. And so the part of you certainly don't want other creatures to be eating your leaves and your stems and your roots. But the last thing in the world you want another creature to be eating is your seeds, because the seeds are the future generation of the plant.
Mm-hmm.
So they're embryos in there. Grains, beans, nuts, and seeds, they're all seeds, and they all contain embryos. And so they're very heavily defended. And that makes sense. They're extremely difficult to digest. They're loaded with lectins, which can poke holes in our cells and which can aggravate our immune system. They're loaded with phytic acid, which is a mineral magnet to hold on to minerals for the future sprouting plant. They don't want those minerals to wash away in the soil, or to be utilized by another creature. So the seed foods, and interestingly enough, these form the staple foods of plant-based diets, because that's where all the protein is too. If you're trying to get protein on a plant-based diet, you have to eat the grains, beans, nuts, and seeds, which
Yep.
are the most difficult foods for us to deal with. So the
Mm-hmm.
more of those you eat, and you don't have to eat a plant-based diet, eat lots of these, because most omnivores base their diets on grains and beans as well, because that's what we're told to do. You are going to contend with a risk of a lot of damage. And this phytic acid, which is this mineral magnet, this interferes significantly with our ability to access key minerals that the brain and the whole body need: zinc, calcium, iron, magnesium. these many people are deficient in these minerals. And so the last thing you want is to be eating something that's actually making it even more difficult for you to
Mm.
access those really important nutrients.
Interesting. So, yeah, this is a concept that seems to be coming up a lot lately, and Amber O'Hearn does a really good job at explaining some of the issues with the modern dietary guidelines and how it's not so straightforward. I mean, if you're looking at a piece of spinach or 100 grams of spinach on paper, it's going to have a certain amount of calcium. It's going to look like it's really high in calcium. But that calcium is not going to be bioavailable because it's going to get bound up with oxalate, which can create calcium oxalate crystals. And so, yeah, this could be a huge issue. You mentioned phytates, and I just want to kind of play devil's advocate here and throw out the argument that you hear sometimes from plant-based crowds that they say, well, look, certain phytates can actually be really good, and certain phytates are used as a therapeutic treatment for things like cancers, I've heard claimed. So, what do you think about the argument that phytates maybe aren't so bad and that they could have a very, very beneficial effect? You know, things like whole grains are being touted as a great source of phytates by some people. Which is the opposite of what we're saying. What would you say to those arguments?
This is a very well put question. So this is a theme that comes up over and over and over again. Is if you look at something logically and you say, okay, this is a toxin, this is a risk, this is a problem, potential problem. People who believe in the health benefits of plants will twist that around to make it look like the toxin or the risky substance in the plant is beneficial,
Yeah.
and that explains why all the ridiculous epidemiological studies tell us that we're healthier if we eat plants.
Mm.
So so this is a perfect example of that. Now there is some truth in it, and this is where it gets complicated. There is some, you can use plants toxins, you can exploit the toxic properties, the natural toxic properties of plants to your advantage if you have a disease that you're trying to attack. If you're trying to attack a cancer cell, you're trying to kill a cancer cell, you might want to use a plant toxin that's good at killing cells.
Hmm.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that you should eat that toxin every day to prevent cancer. That's sort of like saying, well, if I don't want to get cancer down the road, I should take a little dose of chemotherapy every day just in case.
Mm.
Because
Yeah.
chemotherapy is toxic.
Yeah.
And so, yes, you can kill cancer cells with plant toxins, but do you really want to be ingesting them every day on purpose if you don't have to?
Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it. I think, Dr. Paul Saladino, when we talked to him in the past, he also mentioned the hormesis argument is it might be a little bit faulty because when you ingest certain plant toxins, the liver is going to it's you're going to induce your own natural antioxidant, your endogenous antioxidant defenses. So your body's going to release glutathione. Your liver through the NRF2 pathway is going to release certain enzymes and is going to create certain compounds in the body. And the question becomes, okay, well, is your body doing this in response to a toxic compound in the body? And is this necessarily a good thing? So I think, yeah, you put that really well. What do you think about this? The argument that things like sulforaphane, which Dr. Rhonda Patrick really likes to talk about. Saladino's argument is that look, these things, just because it's giving you endogenous release of antioxidants doesn't mean it's good. It could just mean that you're putting something toxic that your body's got to deal with. What do you think about these things? Like sulforaphane being touted as a great health anti-cancer compound, things like turmeric also very, very heavily used. And some people seem to get results with things like turmeric. But of course, the oxalate content in turmeric being very, very high. What is your perspective on this? Should we be looking at maybe using compounds like sulforaphane, turmeric, or should we think twice?
Well, I agree with the good Dr. Saladino on this point. Again, I think that every toxin is a double-edged sword. Every anti-cancer molecule is a double-edged sword, just like chemotherapy is a double-edged sword. So yes, if you ingest something which your body which ramps up your own immune system, which ramps up your detoxification pathways, it makes sense that they would be ramped up because they're trying to detoxify your body of something you just intentionally put in. So let's say you eat some sulfur, you eat a big pile of broccoli sprouts,
Hmm.
and some of that sulforaphane does get absorbed. but it's rapidly detoxified and eliminated from the body. It's kicked out like an unwanted guest. It is not absorbed and welcomed in like a vitamin or a nutrient. So yes, our systems ramp up their detoxification pathways and their antioxidant pathways, but that's because, I think, makes sense to say that's because they need to, because they need to deal with this toxin that you've put in. Now, if you then put in a different toxin, if you're eating a junky diet and you're eating all kinds of things that are going to potentially cause harm, and that unwelcome molecule that we know is bad, or something we know is bad for us, say, then and you happen to eat that right after you've eaten the broccoli sprouts, then your system is ramped up and it's ready to deal with whatever comes its way for those
Mm.
2 or 3 hours. But that doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make any sense to me that we should need to be constantly ingesting toxins to keep our bodies on high alert. Um, and nobody looks at the potential long-term risks of that.
Mm.
Are there any risks to being constantly in a high alert mode? Maybe that's not so good for us. Maybe it'd be better for us to eat fewer things that aggravate our immune and detoxification pathways. But I don't
Mm.
know. Nobody can be 100% sure about these things. These are all the musings of people on different sides of the debate.
Yeah.
But to me, it makes common sense to think, well, of course, those pathways ramp up if you eat a toxic plant product.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and it might just be dealing with the toxic plant product, and it might not be. People assume that, oh, well, you're increasing your antioxidant output, you're increasing antioxidants in the body. Well, what are those actually doing? Are those just dealing with the oxidative stress from the plant compounds, or are they actually giving us a benefit? And this is something we should definitely explore, and these are very important questions to ask. So, thanks. Those are really
We
good.
should explore, and I forgot to mention, you've probably seen this. There's at least one study that shows that if you remove almost all the colorful plant foods from the diet and you eat a very, very low antioxidant diet, that our own immune system, our own antioxidant system improves. That we have a more robust antioxidant
Ah.
internal environment if we eat fewer plant foods, fewer colorful antioxidant rich plant foods. So there's at least one paper that shows that. We need more studies like this. I think those types of studies are really wonderful because they challenge, they try to answer these kinds of questions.
Wow, yeah, that's fascinating. And I think self-experimentation is always interesting if people can be objective. I think a lot of people they jump on, dietary fads and it's always whatever they're doing is the greatest new thing for them. But if we can be objective and if we can actually see what our body's responding to in these different states, I think it'll become clear to a lot of people, right? The very, very colorful foods, all these high vibration foods, the plant-based crowd, they talk about them being almost like they attribute like spiritual power to these foods. But, really when you look at most of the profiles of nutrients in these very, very bright, colorful foods, you're looking at like a lot of lectins, right? I mean, bell peppers, you're looking at, a lot of issues with plant toxins that, especially in nightshades and in these bright, colorful foods that most of us probably cannot handle very well. Do you think that, in the past, we may have handled these plant foods much better, and this is an argument that gets made, and perhaps now in our modern times, when our gut integrity is so it's just under attack from so many different angles, right? We've got pesticide use, we've got glyphosate contamination rampant in the Western world and throughout the whole planet now, and they're finding glyphosate in Arctic seals. So, do you think that the issues with our gut from the high pesticide use, the heavy use of sugar, fungal overgrowth and stuff, do you think that this is causing sensitivities, or do you think that inherently perhaps these foods are just not compatible with our physiology?
Well, another excellent question. I think that it's both. I'm a big fan of the hypothesis that our gut barrier and our immune system function is suffering in the modern environment from lots of different angles: antibiotic use, all kinds of other drugs, plastics, pesticides, toxins in the
Yeah.
environment, the wrong foods, all kinds of things. So I think that obviously we evolved alongside at least certain plant foods for many, many, many hundreds of thousands of years. Um, so, things like fruits, for example, they tend to be rather, most of them tend to be rather low in toxins compared to other parts of the plant or the seeds. The fruits are designed by the plant to be eaten by certain types of animals. So, and they're sweet and they're delicious. They're not bitter. They're easy to digest. So fruit is a little bit different. And
Mm,
I think we certainly evolved to be able to handle a certain amount of fruit. Or the body knows what to do with it. But that's very different than grinding up wheat into a powder and
mm,
baking with it,
yeah.
and that's certainly not something that we have a lot of evolutionary experience with. Um, so so I do think that certain plant foods we've evolved to handle very well, and others none of us handle well. I don't think any of us handle the grains, beans, nuts, and seeds very well, and certain vegetables too.
Mm,
But you can see proof within your biology that we're not designed to handle certain foods because, for example, we don't have the enzymes to break gluten, one of the proteins in wheat, completely down into its constituent amino acids. We don't have those enzymes in our
mm,
system. We don't have the enzymes in our system to break casein, the primary protein in dairy products, down into its constituent amino acids. So that tells you right there that we're really not designed for those things. Whereas the body has really elegant systems for dealing with sulforaphane, for dealing with lots of different toxins in the body. Turmeric, for example, it's a great example.
mm-hmm.
Curcumin in turmeric,
Yeah.
this amazing antioxidant, we don't absorb that unless we manipulate it chemically to sneak it in to the body.
Mm-hmm.
So the body either rejects these toxins by not absorbing them in the first place, or it rapidly detoxifies and eliminates them. So, but then once your gut and immune system are damaged, all bets are off. And then, things are welcome in that normally wouldn't be there.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, you mentioned casein. Now, what about? Because I'm a big fan of raw milk. So you kind of triggered me there, Georgia. Eat,
Promise
Doctor E. No, no, it's okay. I'm just playing. No, look, everybody's got different opinions on so many different foods, but I just wanted to bring up kind of the counter argument. Weston A. Price Foundation. A lot of people say that. Well, if you look at raw milk, there are enzymes present that can actually help you to break down things like casein. When you look at the A1 versus A2 casein, is this something that you've looked into much, or is it kind of ancillary to your interest?
Well, I've looked into it enough to have an opinion about it,
Yeah.
and I am of the opinion that dairy does not belong in the adult human diet.
Hmm.
It's all mammals are designed to have their own species-specific growth formula for a certain period of time until they're big enough to graduate to solid food,
Yeah.
and then you're supposed to be done with dairy. And the reason why I think dairy is problematic is because it is a species-specific growth formula. So not only should you perhaps not be in growth mode every single day of your life, but also because most of us are not consuming human milk the rest of our lives. We're consuming the milk of other animals, and so the proteins, the growth factors, etc., are designed to turn on growth systems in a baby cow,
Hmm.
and they do the very same thing to us. So, for example, whey protein raises insulin levels just as much as refined carbohydrate does. And so it doesn't raise blood sugar levels, it raises insulin levels. And there are other proteins and hormones and growth factors naturally in growth and in dairy products, even if they're not treated with hormones, which affect our growth hormone system, IGF-1 and insulin, just to name a couple. So I think that it makes sense to be skeptical about dairy. I mean, some people do better with dairy than others, but
Hmm.
most people, if they've never taken it out, don't know how it's affecting them. And many of the people I work with in my consult service now, they will call for carnivore. I'm on the carnivore diet and I don't feel good, or I'm gaining weight, or my
Hmm.
cravings aren't gone, or I don't feel right. A lot of women gain weight on a carnivore diet if they include dairy in that diet, and when they take it out, everything feels better.
Yeah, definitely. It's
So
definitely about
doing
context
the
for a lot of people.
experiment's important.
Right, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
if you're trying to lose body fat, dairy is not going to be your best friend. It's hyper palatable. It's easy to eat a lot of. A lot of cheese. It's
Yes.
so easy to take down a block of cheese. But yeah, it's interesting. I think the raw dairy versus pasteurized dairy is definitely a conversation I would love to see furthered in the public sphere. So, we talked to, excuse me, Sally Fallon Morell a few weeks ago, and she's of the opinion she's really into raw dairy, but she says the pasteurized dairy is crap. So I think she would agree with your position that all the pasteurized stuff, I think she would agree with you, but I think she would say that, the raw is a different thing. So yeah, thanks for the opinion on that. Really appreciate that. I think, man, yeah, a lot of women who are having issues with fat loss on both keto and carnivore could benefit from stop eating the cheese. It's so easy. Like I can take down a whole block of any type of cheese you can imagine, except for those stupid Kraft single things. Those are terrible.
Well, it's very, I find personally dairy very addictive.
Yeah.
And I think some other people do as well. Perhaps not everybody, but I do. That's often a red flag. But, you know, you want to choose your battles here. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
certainly raw is better than processed. I mean, that makes perfect sense to me. But I think there are some people who can get away with it and some people can't. And it's helpful to do those experiments if you're having any trouble.
There you go. Yeah, self-experimentation. There you go. And context too, right? It's like carbohydrates. I'm of the opinion that carbohydrates, like you said, fruit. I don't think that I'm not looking at a piece of mango or a banana. When my kids eat a banana, I'm not thinking of them, it's not the same as them mainlining some high fructose corn syrup with,
Right.
with some seed oils or taking down a Snickers bar. There's a big difference between something like, some raw honey in moderation and high fructose corn syrup mixed with soybean oil and partially hydrogenated rapeseed oil or whatever other crap they're putting in these things. I think there are a lot of big differences here. So, yeah, I think it's crucial that people understand that context is important, and people saying, "Oh, I'm doing carnivore." Um, I don't. There's a lot of talk online right now about what is the carnivore diet, right? I think there are a lot of people who are maybe upset with other people's loose definitions. We got someone in the chat here, Garland Farms. Thank you so much for the super chat. I just sent a very generous $100 super chat. It says Primal Edge Health, maintaining the integrity of the carnivore message where others have failed. Well, thank you, man. I'm honored, and that generous donation tells me that you're serious about what you're saying. And yeah, my man Garland Farms, he's going to be on the chat soon, but. Yes, a carnivore diet, a pure carnivore diet, in my definition, would be all animal foods, all meat, not including dairy, right? So we're not, when we're talking about the carnivore diet, I'm talking about an elimination diet for people who have serious autoimmune conditions, for people who have very, very high sensitivity to food, and do not recommend when you're just getting into carnivore to be including things like kefir, lots of cheese, some nuts here and there, or even like a little bit of chocolate here and there. Look, if you're doing carnivore, do it strict. Strip it down to the bare essentials. Let's get a good definition of what this is, and let's not just turn this into this loose thing where nobody really knows what it means. And yeah, so yeah, thank you. I'm responding to a couple people who are throwing the super chats out there, and I know there's some things going on in the carnivore community that people want to address, but we're going to be talking about Georgia Eads' position on these things here, and she has some very, very good, important information on what's called arachnophobia. So we talked about the importance of animal foods and how we do need animal foods. And one of the things that comes with these animal foods are fats. And one of these fats that people are so freaked out about, whether it's in the vegan community or in the paleo keto carnivore community, are omega-6 fatty acids. So are we falsely demonizing omega-6? You wrote a great article for Psychology Today, and I want to get into this thing. So what's up with arachnophobia, and what are we missing here?
Yeah, so that article, I really wanted to, sort of come to the defense of inflammation and omega-6 fatty acids, as much as I enjoy demonizing them as much as the next person. but but it depends on which one we're talking about, and it depends on the degree. So the body needs inflammation. It's the first line of defense against infection or injury. And omega-6 fatty acids are part of that natural defense system in our immune system. So they are essential omega-6 fatty acids. And the one that most people tell us we have to eat is linoleic acid. Linoleic acid you can get from plants or animals, your choice. It's easy to find everywhere. So you never have to worry about getting omega-6. It's naturally in all kinds of fats. But there's a fatty acid called arachidonic acid, which is an omega-6 that you can make from linoleic acid and under certain circumstances. This arachidonic acid makes up about a quarter of the fat in the brain. And
Wow.
so obviously it's important because there it is. And it's also, it has so many other functions in the body in terms of regulating the immune system, regulating inflammation, regulating homeostasis, the blood system. It regulates the hormones of pregnancy. It does all kinds of important things. So it has many, many roles. It's not just about promoting inflammation. But arachidonic acid, this is so interesting. Arachidonic acid can only be found in animal foods. So even though linoleic acid, which is found in all kinds of plant and animal foods, is promotes inflammation, it doesn't get a bad rap by people who promote a vegan diet. It says, oh, we need linoleic acid. That's good. Arachidonic acid, which comes from linoleic acid, but is only found in animal foods, that's demonized because that causes inflammation and therefore that's bad.
Hmm.
So not only is arachidonic acid important for inflammation, just like linoleic acid is important, but it's important for all of these other crucial body and brain processes. And so, and it's very unclear after infancy whether or not we can make enough arachidonic acid out of linoleic acid. And I think that if you want to be on the safe side, it's important to eat some sources of arachidonic acid to make sure you've got enough.
Hmm.
Because, and especially during infancy, it's very clear that we cannot make enough arachidonic acid to meet our needs from plant sources. So it's another one of those stories that just underscores the importance of animal foods to human nutrition that many people are in denial about.
Interesting. So if it's from plants, it's good. If it's from animals, it's bad, regardless of if it's. Yeah, you see the same thing with coconut oil sometimes, right? You know, saturated fat's so bad, but and then
Right.
coconut oil and all the ingredients of the recipes from these gurus. It's a funny world. So the inflammatory process in the body is necessary. Let's kind of unpack that a little bit. I mean, a lot of people think, oh, got to reduce inflammation, reduce inflammation, reduce inflammation. And of course, yeah, if there's inflammatory processes that are, runaway inflammation, you're going to want to get to the root of that and what's causing the inflammation, whether that be, a sensitivity to food. You probably want to reduce that. But inflammation in general, is it bad? Should we be demonizing it to this extent?
Well, just like most things in the body, you need a little bit goes a long way, and you don't want too much. So you want your body to be in balance. You want your immune system to be in balance. You want to have the inflammatory forces like linoleic acid and arachidonic acid in balance with the healing forces, the omega-3, the DA, the EPA, the healing forces of the body. But and by the way, arachidonic acid also plays a role in healing. But
Hmm.
let's ignore that, right? So these two things need to be roughly in balance. And if you eat properly and live a healthy lifestyle, they will be roughly in balance. Of course, we're designed that way. But if you eat too many of the wrong fats too often, if you're eating a diet full of vegetable oil, so-called vegetable oil, which are the seed oils,
Hmm.
sunflower, soybean, canola, safflower, cottonseed oils, all of these industrially produced oils are exceedingly unnaturally high in linoleic acid omega-6. And now you've tilted your system far too far towards inflammation and away from healing. And good luck recovering from injury or infection or trauma, including emotional trauma,
Hmm.
if your system is so out of balance. So yes, we need inflammation, but we don't want too much.
Hmm, interesting, right? Well, yeah, think of when you just an example for anybody who does like resistance training, right? You do an intense workout, you're creating damage, and your muscles are going to be a little bit inflamed the next day, but that's part of the healing process. High level athletes are advised not to do ice baths directly after resistance training if they're trying to build muscle. If muscle growth is the goal, because you don't want to stop that inflammatory response instantly. So, right, even just for the growth process, even in children for the growth process, an inflammatory response is required in tissues, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And the other thing that will turn on the inflammation imbalance is high sugar diets, too much refined carbohydrate, flour, sugar, fruit juice, cereals, those sorts of things create inflammation as well through a different pathway. So the refined carbohydrates and the seed oils, those are the signature ingredients of modern dangerous diets, not
Mm.
meat and saturated fat. We've been eating those forever. The new things, the new kids on the block are the refined seed oils and the refined carbohydrates. And I think those are largely to blame for chronic inflammation and all of the diseases of the body and the brain that come from
Mm.
chronic inflammation.
What do you think about there are a few people like are you familiar with Ray Peat?
I know that name, yes.
You know,
Repeat form,
he
yes.
comes up. Yeah, he comes up every once in a while. I've got to look deeper into him now. Forgive me, any Ray Peatites out there. I'm sure I'm misrepresenting his opinions, but I believe he says that he kind of takes a different route and says that the seed oils are a major problem. We're looking at inflammatory omega 6 fatty acids, and I believe he even isn't a huge fan of DHA supplementation. Now, I think he's fine with fish and getting it from natural sources, but I think he's very against the seed oils, the polyunsaturated fatty acids, and he's of the opinion that the carbohydrates are actually not the issue, and that without the seed oils, carbohydrates in and of themselves might not even be a problem. And I even see some of these Ray Peat people doing a lot of fruit juice and stuff. So I'm sorry if I misrepresented it, but yeah, just throwing that out there for maybe for your opinion on that, and if the audience wants to look deeper into this, just to give you some other areas of research that maybe contradicts what you might hear within paleo and keto circles. What do you think about that assertion that the carbohydrates aren't really the problem, that it's just the seed oils that are creating insulin resistance and inflammatory responses chronically?
I'm glad you asked that because I often wonder this myself because I do think that so the way that the way I think about it, obviously we evolved to handle natural whole food sources of carbohydrate. They've been in our environment forever, like fruits, for example, and certain starchy roots and things like that. And we have enzymes in our system to be able to break down these things and to absorb fructose, et cetera. So carbohydrates are part of our natural food environment. But then what causes insulin resistance? It probably was not high carbohydrate whole foods diets because we have some information from traditional populations were eating high carbohydrate diets, but they weren't eating lots of junky carbohydrates. They're just eating lots of root vegetables and fruits and things like that. And in some cases, even certain grains, whole grains. They appear to be incredibly healthy compared to us. So, and they didn't seem to develop the diseases of insulin resistance the way most of us do. So, I'm not of the belief that carbohydrates in and of themselves are bad.
Yeah.
Now, the second question is it refined carbohydrates or vegetable oils or both that are causing insulin resistance? And the best answer I have to this comes from Dr. Eric Westman. We were in, we were at low carb Indonesia in Jakarta
Wow.
just a couple of months ago, and someone asked this question. I thought it was, and I said something like, I don't know. I think it's, maybe both. How are we supposed to really understand this? And Dr. Westman said in his, great sort of common sense wisdom, he said, well, even if we're not sure that that's what causes it, we know that if we get rid of the sugar, it gets better
Mm.
without removing the vegetable oils. All you have to do is eat a low carbohydrate diet of any quality, and the insulin resistance improves significantly and the blood sugar comes down and all of that sort of thing. And I thought that made really good sense. It doesn't necessarily mean that's all you need to do to be perfectly healthy, but it argues for the fact that the refined carbohydrates are playing a major role in and of themselves.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah. This is something that I would love to see more research on, right? I'd love to see more people engaging in conversations. Maybe I'll have to have Ray Pete on sometime and hear from him exactly what his position is, because it seems like there are a lot of people who are very into it, even people who are going from carnivore and including a lot more fruit and stuff, but still eating a lot of saturated fat and focusing on the meats. They seem to be doing very well, and that's basically how my kids eat. My kids eat the Ray Pete diet. They eat fruits and carbohydrates seasonally and locally in whole food form, and then all the meat, all the carnivore foods, all the fat, and shoot, they're doing pretty dang good. So he might be onto something there. Um, so
I
speaking,
think it's a very healthy diet for a child. Very healthy.
yeah, well, I mean that must play such an. How much do you think infant nutrition is playing a role in this mental health crisis that we're seeing?
Huge. Their nutrient deficiencies are more and more common in children. Insulin resistance is more and more common in children. We're seeing diabetes in young children. And there are more and more women choosing plant-based diets and pre, during, and post-pregnancy, and even raising children on plant-based diets without realizing that those diets are dangerously nutrient deficient. So this is a huge problem because there are certain nutrients, especially between the third trimester and the age of 2, which you can only get from animal foods, and which are required to develop the brain properly. And those types of deficits, it seems to be the case that it may be impossible to reverse later in life.
Yeah.
So if you have a developmental brain disorder such as autism, for example, and other forms of ADHD and neurodevelopmental, cognitive neurodevelopmental problems, that you really want to not take any chances during, especially the first 2 years of life, with nutrition. You want to make sure you're getting animal fats, animal proteins, all the right nutrients, and not too much of the stuff that, I mean, lots of parents are now feeding their kids highly processed stuff
Yeah.
that's sold by baby food companies targeted towards children, and it's full of vegetable oil and it's full of
Yeah.
sugar. And I can't imagine what that's doing to the developing brain.
Well, it's insane. And these companies are actually internationally, they're lobbying governments to promote these soy-based formulas and, to promote these even in many cases in place of breastfeeding, which is, I mean, it's just absolutely criminal, right? So we're looking at industrial waste products being marketed to us as food. And yeah, I mean, as somebody, we were talking earlier before we started, I live in Ecuador. There are a lot of expats that live all around Latin America. So there's little communities of expats all around. And it usually tends to be kind of people in more, like say the fringes of society, like, not like riffraff type people, but people who have different ideas about life, people who are looking for something more. So they tend to be more inclined towards dietary changes as well as, lifestyle changes like moving to South America. But that brought a lot of vegetarians and vegans into a lot of the areas areas down here in the town that we live in, especially like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 2011, 2012. There were a lot of vegans and vegetarians trying to raise their kids on these diets. And we've since seen all of them go back to eating meat. And the ones who held out the longest all suffered, really intense consequences. And unfortunately, and this is anecdotal, of course, but man, the level of, developmental disorders, kind of autism type symptoms that we see in the vegan and vegetarian populations within the valley that we live in, it's staggering. It is very, very, very noticeable. The behavioral issues, the cognitive deficiencies that a lot of these kids who are raised on these vegan vegetarian diets have, and you don't see that among Ecuadorians. The Ecuadorians just laugh. They're like, all these gringos, like none of them eat meat. Like none of them. They all treat their dogs like people, and they're crazy. They just think they're nuts. Like none of these people eat meat, and they don't eat sugar. Like what do they eat? They don't eat meat. They don't eat sugar. What do these people eat? And but yeah, it's been noticeable. So I just want to throw that one out there. And my opinion on the vegan diet for kids is that it is very dangerous. And please reconsider, if any vegan vegetarian parents watching right now, please consider the importance of animal fats. Give those kids some egg yolks at least. Um, so I've got a question. All right, so speaking of feeding kids industrial waste products, you wrote a really good expose of the Eat Lancet Commission and the diet that they were promoting for global dietary guidelines. And what is here? I'm gonna actually refresh. Let me refresh your page real quick because
Sure.
I'm getting a little bit of interference as far as the video goes. That's better. The Eat Lancet Commission. What do you think about the push for global dietary guidelines and some of the interests behind it? You wrote a great article. What was the article titled on psychology? Was it Psychology Today?
I was on Psychology Today. It was called Eat Lancet's Plant-Based Planet 10 Things You Need to Know. And there was a video that just got released yesterday from Low Carb Denver, where I gave a presentation about that same topic. So it's now on YouTube. If you don't want to read the article, you could see the YouTube video. That's called Eat Lents. It's plant-based planet food in the misanthropocene. And so those,
I like that. It's a good one.
so take your choice. But I think this is an incredibly, incredibly important document. And the criticism of it is, unfortunately, it's humorous, but it's also really tragic. So it was very easy to read the 11 pages of the report that were dedicated to nutrition recommendations. Those nutrition recommendations essentially boil down to either 0 grams of animal food per day, up to maybe 14 grams of red meat per day, kind of thing. Very, very, very small amounts of meat, about a
It's
quarter
two
ounce of
bites.
meat.
2 bites of meat you get.
Exactly. Right, right, right. And so extremely low or no meat diets is what is supposed to rescue our health and rescue our planet. So that's their recommendation. And then they spend these 11 pages trying to defend or explain how they came to these recommendations. And it's just absurd and laughable.
Yeah.
Their logic is twisted. They contradict themselves. They make up numbers out of thin air. They rely almost entirely on epidemiology, which are these questionnaire-based studies, which are essentially worthless. And when there are randomized controlled trials that they include, they dismiss them. Or give a recommendation that goes directly against a piece of evidence they've just cited. So I really firmly believe that they didn't think that anyone was going to bother to read the document. They thought people were going to take their advice at face value, and most people are. Because this document is, it's not, it's not a pleasure read. It's got this pretentious, unwelcoming title,
Yeah.
Food in the Anthropocene. That right alone is going to scare off lots of people. Just that word. And so, people just think, oh, this is a Harvard-led study,
Yeah.
supported by one of the most prestigious journals in the world. Of course, they know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
But they don't. And this document is anti-scientific and dangerously deficient.
Interesting. Yeah. What kind of deficiencies do you think people would come up with, or what do you think some of the issues as far as just health goes? Not even looking at the ridiculous environmental arguments that are being made, and the global corporate, the enshrinement of Nestle and Bayer Monsanto as the champions of the environment. Not even looking at that ridiculousness, but just looking at the diet. What do you think we would be dealing with as far as our health, both physical and mental, if we are to follow Eat Lancet's recommendations of a high legume, high grain diet?
Yeah, so the authors themselves acknowledge that their diet is deficient in protein and other nutrients for babies, for children, for teenage girls, for pregnant women, for aging adults, for the malnourished and the impoverished. And everybody else has to take supplements. Which supplements do they need to take? B12, omega-3 supplements, iron supplements, other mineral supplements. And all of this is acknowledged in the report, that these diets are too low in protein for growing humans. And all this is acknowledged in the report and then simply dismissed and saying, okay, well, fine, but supplements. You can just take supplements. And that is true. That is a choice you can make. You can decide, all right, I don't feel comfortable eating animals. I'm going to supplement my way around this. But the document downplays the risks of deficiencies of these diets. And the actual recommendations do not give you enough information to be able to carefully supplement your diet. They say, oh, don't worry about this, don't worry about that. You can take a multi-mineral. You can take omega-3. We don't know plant-based omega-3. We don't know exactly how much you would need to take, but you probably need one of those. And it's just, it's incredibly irresponsible. I think it should, be viewed as malpractice.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, it's kind of criminal level negligence of real nutritional science there. I mean, especially since they admit that it's not beneficial for kids, that this is actually dangerous for growing humans. Why would you feed this to the world? It doesn't seem like it. I don't know. Maybe they plan on stopping global warming by getting rid of all the people. Maybe that's.
Well, that probably would help, but I don't know if that'd be my first choice.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so we talked about eat Lance, we talked about arachnophobia, we've talked about the necessity of animal foods. Um, I want to talk a little bit about the carnivore diet and how you've been implementing this both in your own life, but then also in your practice. I mean, what type of applications and what type of cases might somebody want to consider the complete removal of plants and going very, very elemental on an all animal meat based diet where they're just eating meat, salt, and drinking water? When would this apply, and when might people want to implement something like this?
Yes. So I think there are many circumstances where this may be worth exploring, and I think of a carnivore diet, a well-constructed carnivore diet, as the ultimate elimination diet, as the ultimate way to sort out food sensitivities and other types of issues and resolve problems which you haven't been able to resolve in any other way. So if you're already eating a healthy whole foods diet and you're feeling great, you may not need to do anything. But if you're eating what you think is a healthy diet, or you've tried keto, or you've tried whole food plant based, or you've tried Mediterranean, or you've tried, whatever diet is you've done everything you can think of. You tried paleo, and you're still not feeling well, or even if you just want to do this as your first step, um, eliminating all the plant foods and the dairy and all the junk, and just eating fresh animal foods, meat, seafood, poultry, unprocessed to the extent you can find that, that is the ultimate elimination diet, that it contains everything you need and nothing you don't need, and
Mm,
it eliminates most of the common culprits in autoimmune conditions, in
yeah.
chronic inflammation, in mental health disorders. It naturally eliminates most of the culprits, not all. You can still have trouble even on carnivore diet, which is half of what my consult service is about. Half of my consult service is about mental health.
Yeah.
The other half is about what's wrong with my carnivore diet, or my keto diet. Um, it doesn't eliminate all of them, but it eliminates the vast majority of them. So I think it's worth a try for anyone who's struggling with their health, and is curious about how far diet can take them. For a month or two, it's really well worth it.
Yeah, what type of specific ailments are you seeing a lot of people using carnivore successfully as, a therapeutic approach for? What type of ailments are people attacking with an all meat diet and a carnivorous approach?
Yeah, so interesting. Just anything you can think of. So I have people in my practice who have resolved things like chronic skin conditions,
Hmm.
um, chronic arthritis, all kinds of inflammatory conditions. Lots of people using carnivore to treat chronic digestive problems,
Oh yeah.
IBS, and things like that, chronic pain syndromes, and mental health conditions, depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, those types of things. And so it really runs the gamut. I think what I'm seeing most of, probably because I'm a psychiatrist who has this particular personal background with my own health, a lot of people who contact me and are reaching out for assistance have similar story to mine, and that resonates with them, and they want to get my take on it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, because I'm a psychiatrist, I get a lot of people who are interested in carnivore for mental health. So, people like Dr. Sean Baker get a different population often. But as a psychiatrist and a woman, I tend to perhaps attract a different group of people. But I've seen it help people with lots of different kinds of problems. It really is a pretty powerful tool to have in the toolbox.
Yeah, absolutely. The arthritis thing is something that always amazes me, just how quickly people's arthritic symptoms go away. But then conversely, how, if they have, they go eat some cake one day, they end up, slipping up, they'll say that the next day, like, oh, all of a sudden my knee hurts again, and it hasn't hurt in, months. And then I had one meal off, and now my knee's in pain again after eating some oxalates. So it's fascinating to see this play out and see people really manage their lifestyle choices and completely remit these things. Like anxiety is so rampant these days, I mean, and I don't think the root of it is all dietary, but diet seems to play a major role in reducing anxiety and depression.
You're absolutely right. I think anxiety is one of the most predictable things to improve on any kind of a low carbohydrate diet, including a carnivore diet, because it stabilizes stress hormone levels and stabilizes insulin and blood sugar levels so nicely. And that whole roller coaster is, I think, responsible for the lion's share of mood swings, anxiety attacks,
Mm,
insomnia, just people feeling uneasy, on edge, stressed, irritable. Um, I notice a difference for myself. I've been on various versions of keto and carnivore for a number of years now, low plant and no plant diets, and I notice when I take a day off or two, as a human being will do, I don't function the same way. I don't
mm,
concentrate to the same level. I don't get as much done. I'm more irritable, more stressed. Huge difference. And I don't have any history of serious mental health problems. And I'll imagine if you had serious depression or anxiety or mood swings or bipolar disorder, how much relief a diet like this could bring you potentially. And I should say, if I might, that if you're struggling with a serious mental illness or if you're taking psychiatric medication, there are a couple of things to know. One is that you don't ever want to stop your medication abruptly. That can be very, very dangerous in some cases or extremely uncomfortable in other cases. And also that some mental health conditions can temporarily get worse before they get better during the
mm.
adaptation phase. So keep that in mind. I have free information about all of this. Actually, Diet Doctor just published. We collaborated on a series of low carb mental health guides that are free for everybody to access. So it tells you all about the medications. It tells you all about what to expect and how long it might take if you're trying to use diets like this to treat a mental health problem.
Yeah, yeah. The anxiety is that's a huge one. I mean, it's amazing. It amazes me how many people in my generation, how many kids when I was growing up, especially when I got to college, realizing how many kids were taking things like Klonopin, lorazepam, and some of these benzodiazepines. And man, I mean, I definitely saw them ruin some lives. Not just people using them recreationally. I'm talking about people who were prescribed these things, and if somebody can end up managing anxiety symptoms and not needing them and maybe weaning off them with the help of a doctor and working with their healthcare professional to wean off these things safely, it seems like this can just be so beneficial to people. Especially, I mean, physically, these things take a toll too, as the benzos and these things. Do you see a lot of issues with drug abuse? I know that you used to work at the university. What do you think about like the drug issue in the United States today? What do you think's going on there?
Oh, well, a couple of things. So on college campuses, the most popular drugs are alcohol and marijuana. But in other settings, I used to, for a number of years, I worked on Cape Cod in Massachusetts, where there was a huge opiate
You know.
addiction problem there. A lot of people unemployed and depressed. So alcohol in every setting, but then depending on the age group you're working with in the population, it may be other. But substance abuse is really interesting to me. I I feel that people aren't stupid; they do things for a reason, right? And so if you're not feeling right, you're going to start experimenting with things. I mean, sometimes you'll just experiment with things as a teenager or in college just to experiment.
Yeah.
But if you find that something actually is helping you, at least in the short term, you're going to use it again. And it does work. Alcohol can reduce anxiety. Pot can, in some cases, reduce anxiety or help with sleep, pain. These types of drugs help short term, but in the long term, the body's really smart. It finds a workaround,
Yeah.
and you develop tolerance, and you can develop addiction, you can develop dependence, and you can develop resistance, receptor resistance, just like insulin resistance to a lot of these drugs. And then and caffeine is the same. And eventually, you find yourself at very high doses and it's not working anymore. And then what do you do? So, but why are people so anxious and depressed
Yeah.
and unsettled in the first place? Why do they have chronic pain? Why can't they sleep? Why can't they concentrate? Why do they feel they need Adderall? Why do they feel they need pot to help them sleep? Why do they feel they need alcohol to calm down at the end of the day? That's the question and I think you are
Yeah.
also really interested in asking. That's the $1 million question.
Right, right. And when you start looking at that, you're kind of presented with a kaleidoscope of issues that are going on. I mean, we have everything from people watching too much dang television and just being scared shitless all day long from what they're hearing on TV and the news, and um, then we have the education system, which I think is very, very flawed when we're sitting down most of the day. Terrible posture. A lot of us grow up, I mean, now everything's computer, so everybody's hunched over. It's got the forward head posture, blocks off, blood flow to the brain. Also, you're not going to be digesting as well because you're not moving your legs like normal human beings would be. And it's crazy. I mean, we were talking about living in Ecuador earlier. Like, for the audience who doesn't know, our family, we live in Ecuador. And you don't see, there isn't a drug crisis in Ecuador. There's no opioid
Mm.
crisis in Latin America. I mean, yeah, there's people who have some issues with alcohol, but this is, kind of cross cultural. But you're not seeing a benzo um, addiction problem among people in Ecuador. You're not seeing high levels of antidepressants being prescribed, and I think a lot of this has to do with lifestyle. Kids are working. Kids are working with the families. The families are still intact. Television news is not this constant barrage of crises to freak us out and put us into this instant reaction fight or flight mode. And I think culturally in the U.S. there's so many factors that are playing into it. What do you think about this? How much do you think that media and basically our way of life and the things that we consume educationally even are affecting mental and emotional health?
Well, I love everything you just said because this is it, right? It's all so much of it is context, and I haven't lived in Ecuador, and but I have spent time in other countries, and and for example, recently, and again, low carb Indonesia. We're in Indonesia, where the culture there is very much extended family. A lot of people are very social. No one is lonely. No one is lonely. Loneliness is not a thing. Everyone is always together, supporting each other, laughing, doing things together, lifting each other up, helping each other out. And American culture and much of Western culture is very much an isolating culture
Mm-hmm.
and not a physical culture. We don't exercise enough. We don't play enough. We are exposed, like you said. I love what you said, that we're watching, consuming media all day long.
Right?
Wherever there's a crisis around the world, we have immediate access to it.
Yeah,
Now that
these
wouldn't have
things,
been
we're
the
like
case
living in
evolutionarily.
these things. Our little monolith black mirrors are constantly freaking us out all the time, right?
Yeah, I mean, evolutionarily, we would have only been exposed to whatever emergencies were going on in our environment,
Hmm.
not to every emergency that was going on everywhere around the planet 24/7. We're just not designed to handle constant crisis like that.
Yeah.
So, and then our food environment is putting our body on high alert all the time. Because if you're eating a diet of a lot of refined carbohydrates and seed oils and things like that, you're setting the stage for inflammation and oxidation and raising your stress hormone levels around the clock. And so that's not healthy either. So
Hmm.
everything is upside down.
Yeah.
And medications certainly can't. Medications and substance abuse, those aren't the answers. The answers are far more complicated.
Right, yeah, probably a much more holistic approach is going to be necessary. Unfortunately, it seems like these things are probably going to have to ramp up a little bit more before people take note. But yeah, it's a stark difference that I see between the attitude and the mentality of the people in the town that we live in, and just the former environment that we used to inhabit. Right, the Ecuadorian culture is it's so much more about local relationships. They're so much less concerned. People don't give a shit about Facebook likes and stuff. Yeah, they play on Facebook. Facebook's huge in Latin America, but it's not like it is in the U.S. And I think there's a lot to be said for just real community, real interaction with people, and maybe everyone's talking about fasting. Everyone's talking about not eating. How about instead of fasting from food, you do a social media fast, right? Get off of YouTube for a month. Get off of Facebook for a month. Um, Yeah, here I am on YouTube telling people to get off of YouTube, and it's a very funny world we live in. But really, take a break, guys. Take a break off the social media, and you just might feel better, and you might help fix some relationships in your immediate vicinity, rather than letting them fester while you're living inside your cell phone. Um, but yeah, what about social
Yeah.
media? So how do you feel about social media and its effect on mental health and physical health?
Well, I think it's a double-edged sword. I mean, I think like any new technology, it can be used for good or for evil.
Yeah,
And one of the good things I have to say about social media is that people feel less alone with whatever problem it is they're dealing with, and people can find information and support and guidance for free, um, very very easily. Whereas, even just 10 years ago, as a psychiatrist, I know because people would come and talk to me about these things, a lot of people would feel like, well, I'm the only one with this problem, or how could I ever, I can't imagine anybody else dealing with the same kinds of things that I'm dealing with. And that's no longer the case. And that's very, very helpful. But the flip side is that, it doesn't help any of us to enrich our, as you said, to enrich our local relationships, face to face interactions, skin to skin interactions with
right,
other people. We need those to be fully human and alive and healthy. Our oxytocin, our hormone system needs contact, physical, audio, visual, skin contact with other human beings. And it's not a substitute for that. It's really, I think that's the problem, is that, like I have this online consult service now, which I love, and I really enjoy being able to try to help people around the world and connect with people around the world. But I find it so frustrating that I can't make eye contact with people
right.
through a video screen. I can't make eye contact with you right now,
Yeah,
and that is so frustrating. And even though we're connected, we're not really connected.
yeah.
And I really feel that the interactions suffer as a result.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's a whole layer in between most of our interactions that we're having through these all the interactions we have through technology. There's a layer in between there, and it disconnects us, and it's yeah, fascinating world. Yeah, I like how you mentioned it's like we're not wired to be receiving this constant input from this many people too. It's you how in what in what society, in what reality would we have had everybody's thoughts being shared with us at a constant pace about everything that we express, right? You express a sentiment on the internet, and you're going to have 50 people praising you, 50 people telling you you're the devil, and we're not used to having this much input. It's like you look someone in the eyes, you enjoy a conversation, a real conversation with somebody, you hash out the differences, you have a polite exchange, and you move on. But now it's like people are on their phone constantly and just getting likes, getting comments, and it's just it really is. It seems to be rewiring our nervous system in a very very dangerous way, and these things have been studied. In behaviorism and in the cognitive sciences and the social sciences, these things have been studied as tools for mass manipulation. So we're not just looking at accidental. I would say we're not just looking at accidental results of this. I mean, these are, if you look deeper into the research of behaviorists and cybernetics, these feedback loops of information are ways that can be used to essentially control mass population. So I think we do have to be wary of that, especially with big tech becoming so keen on controlling narratives on the internet. So yeah, thank you so much for talking about some of these issues, because this is something that's greatly affecting, especially the younger generations. These kids who grew up with it. Like, at least I had a time when we didn't have cell phones. I can remember what it was like to really to not be connected to the cell phone all the time. But man, these kids who were born after like 2000, 2001, they kind of just grew up with this, and that's alarming to me.
I mean, back in my day, all we had was smoke signals. So I think that
Yeah, tin cans
I
between
remember what that was. I remember what it was like to have to go outside and play with your friends.
terrible.
We weren't even really allowed to talk to them on the phone.
That's the
Because
best.
phones had these cords attached to them, and somebody else needed the phone. You couldn't just hang out on the phone all day long,
Yeah.
so you had to go out and play with them. But first of all, I just want to say, you know a lot about a lot of different topics. It's pretty interesting talking with you. I mean, you seem
Mm.
to be very knowledgeable about many, many different things. And so it's really fun to talk about lots of different types of things.
Thanks, thanks.
And no, it's great. And my guess is that's why so many people love watching your podcast, or even just
Yeah.
listening. It's really, it's a great conversation.
Thanks. Well, I think part of it is I could get great guests on, get great people to bounce ideas off of, and I kind of see this as a think tank almost, right? I get to talk to the coolest people that have some of the the cutting edge of whatever I want to talk about. I can find those people and talk to them, so I feel really fortunate to be in this position. And but yeah, I think the holistic approach to this is so important, right? We're not looking for just a silver bullet answer to all these problems. I think that there's a lot of complex issues going on in the world, and yeah, so some of the stuff that really has been fascinating me lately, though, is just kind of the history of, um, like I mentioned earlier, I think this was maybe what triggered your interest was that cybernetics, behaviorism, and you're a psychiatrist, so I know you probably take a very very keen interest in this, especially you being around Harvard, where a lot of this research was done in the 50s and 60s. But this stuff fascinates me, and especially technology as a transformative agent in society right now is something that fascinates and alarms me, and I think we should definitely look deeper into these issues, and not just take it as, oh, the cell phone's so great, we should all embrace this, and let's put 5G everywhere and give constant data feedback into this feedback loop. I think this is something that really interests me. What do you think about all this stuff? As being somebody from Harvard, being a psychiatrist, what do you think about some of these ideas that I was just talking about? Some of these seemingly fringe and maybe even crazy to some people, these ideas.
No, I mean, I think it's all fair game. We don't really know, right? We don't know the long-term effects
Yeah.
of this very, very rapid change in our ability to hyperconnect and yet not connect at all.
Right. Right.
Um, I think that's the problem, is that it's the illusion of connection, and it's no substitute for the real thing. And long term, I think how people manage that, it's like any new technology. You have to find a balance. You have to find a way to use it without having it use you up.
Mm.
And everyone can find a different way to do that. But like you said, unplugging from time to time is really important to see how it's affecting you. It's just like doing a dietary elimination, right? You take the food out to see if it's bothering you. How do you know if it's bothering you if you don't take it out for a little while?
Mm.
And don't lose the ability to connect in the real world. Don't lose the ability to entertain yourself with your own thoughts, or or just be quiet for a long time,
Right.
or to create something that nobody else will ever see.
Ooh.
I think
Uh-oh. You mean like you can smile without taking a selfie? Is that possible?
yes.
Wow. You can make the duck lips without selfies, guys. You can make this face without selfies. You can do that. You don't have to share it.
Yeah, if somebody smiles in the forest, does anybody ever really see it? Does it really happen? I don't know, something like that.
Yeah. If a smile cracks in the forest and it's not on Instagram Live, did it really happen?
Exactly.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, interesting stuff. Interesting stuff. So, where can people find you? I try to keep these under 2 hours, but I could keep questioning you and keep grilling you because I love to. I love these conversations. But let's maybe stop it now. We can do another one in the near future if we want to expand on some of these ideas. Where can people find you, Dr. Georgia Eid? And I know you mentioned you do a lot of consultations, and I think there would probably be some people listening here who might want to pick your brain and to get some feedback from you as well. Where can they find you, and how can they set up a consultation?
Well, the consultation is easy to learn about. On my website, which is Diagnosis Diet. There's a consultations tab, and it explains everything about how the consultations work. And there's a self-scheduling button, and everything is explained. And if it's not easy to understand, you can just send me an email. And if you're not sure if the consult is right for you, then I can help. So that's the consult service. And I've got lots of free articles on Psychology Today. I have these new low carb mental health guides that are being
Nice.
published right now on Diet Doctor, that are free for everyone. And I often speak at conferences, and there are a bunch of YouTube videos up now about various topics that I've addressed. So plenty of free information for people if a consult's out of range. But I'm particularly interested consult service wise in people who are looking for specialized help with mental health, because that's my area of expertise. But I'll help with anything you have questions about. And I don't want this conversation to end before, and I never do this, but I have to say, this
Whoa.
book by Jessica, this is a fantastic book, and I'm not just saying this. Carnivore Cookbook. Um, you know, I'm not a cook. I can't eat half the things in this book, and I still love this book. And the reason why is because it's laid out the way I wish a book were laid out, and it describes not just, okay, here are some recipes, but it says, here are the different cuts of meat. Here's how you cut up a chicken. Here's why animal foods are good for you, and here's why you don't need to worry. Here's why you don't need to be afraid. Here's why you don't need to feel this particular way about meat. Here's how you. I mean, it's just amazing. I think it just and it's really accessible. It's really well written, and I recommend it to people who are trying a carnivore diet. So I never promote books like this online like this, but I just have to say that I
Wow.
think it's really exceptional.
What an honor. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's funny when we sent you a copy and you gave some feedback to Jessica via email. She lit up. She was so happy to have your seal of approval. We got a lot of respect for what you do. We've been reading your articles and following your work over the years, and it's an honor to finally connect, and it's especially an honor to have you throw the seal of approval on the Carnivore Cookbook. So you guys, if you're interested in the Carnivore Cookbook, you want to support the work we're doing here, make sure to check out primaledgehealth.com. And last little announcement, there's going to be a link in the description below as well for this. And then in the pinned comments below, you'll see a link to Dr. Georgia Eads' website. That's diagnosisdiet.com, right?
Yeah, that's right.
All right.
And I'm on Facebook and Twitter, for better or for worse. I'm on
Uh,
Facebook and Twitter, and I do my best to answer as many questions as I can there. They're both Georgia Eid MD. My last name is EDE, Georgia Eid MD, on Twitter and on Facebook. For people who have quick questions or want to engage in a conversation that way. Yeah, I'm really. I, I hope people know this. Here I am on a carnivore podcast, but I don't just help with carnivore diets. I don't just believe in carnivore diets. There are many different dietary strategies
yeah.
that can be helpful. It doesn't have to be carnivore, but the theory and the science behind carnivore I find very robust and appealing. And I think it's an extremely healthy approach to lots of different chronic problems. So but even if for people who eat plant-based diets, I can help you supplement properly. I'm not anti anybody. I just want people to find the diet that works best for them, and to try to use diet before medications or instead of medications whenever possible.
There you go. Yeah, and I'll second that sentiment, right? It's like there's no one way to go about it. We've been promoting low carbohydrate, ketogenic diets for a long time here. And that doesn't mean that a low carb or carnivore keto approach is the only way. It's about context, right? Like I said earlier, my kids eat fruit all day long. They were just feasting on they had some cherry moya and then this other sapayo plant that they get here. But there's nothing wrong with the fruits in context. It's not like the carbs are all bad, that all plant foods are terrible for everybody. It's about the context. And you got to understand what works for you, find what works for you, and stick with it. Because you got to find what's sustainable in your life and to sustain your physical vessel there. So, yeah, thanks so much for tuning in, guys. You can find more at primaledgehealth.com. The next Keto and Carnivore Collective, our group community coaching, is going on the 7th of July. So we've got about 2 weeks left to sign up for that. The 7th of July, we are starting. It is a 1-month community coaching session, and you get 2 live interactive voice chats with us every week. One of those has a lesson, and then the other one is just a Q&A. We do a Q&A at the end of the lesson as well. And we want to help you to formulate a diet that you can stick with long term, that you can enjoy long term. So whether that be a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet, we can help you out with that. So if you're interested in the coaching, I still do private consultations consultations, but we tend to push people more towards the group coaching because it's a better, we like it better. It's a community-based experience. You get to bounce ideas off of each other, and you get to support each other and make lasting relationships that you can actually hold each other accountable moving forward. So the Keto and Carnivore Collective starting on the 7th of July. And of course, check out the Carnivore Cookbook. That's the last plug. I'll see you guys next time. Have a great day.